Hello and welcome to NewsClick. The past weeks saw some major debates among economists and statisticians in India after it was revealed that one of the major databases used for calculating the country's GDP was full of holes. To talk more about this, we have with us Professor Surajit Mazumdar, a noted economist. Welcome, Arnold.
Thank you.
So, to start with, to give a brief explanation for our viewers, this is about the MCA21 database, which has a list of companies, and a survey by the NSSO revealed that many of them, at least 38% of them, are maybe shell companies or are not traceable. So there has been an argument after this that this fundamentally affects the calculation of the GDP in India. So do you agree with that argument? Or?
Well, we do not have as yet all the details required in order to be able to make a precise assessment about what effect it has on GDP. Now, if these are companies which have never filed anything, and therefore there is no data in the MCA21 database which is entered into GDP calculations, then it might not affect the GDP calculations. But if these are companies which are not in regular business activity but have been created and operated for other considerations, and in the process they have filed returns at some point of time which has entered into some years' data, then of course it would affect the calculations that you would get from this MCA21 database.
Right. And to take a step back, could you also explain how exactly this database works and what is its role in the calculation of the GDP itself, and especially after the recent changes that have been made to the calculation?
Well, you know, when the new 2011-12 base year GDP series was introduced, there was two important changes which relate to the MCA21 database. One was with regard to the manufacturing sector. The measurement of GDP in manufacturing was no longer to be based on what was called the establishment, but the enterprise. Okay, which is, so the enterprise is the firm which is engaged in manufacturing activity, but it may have other side supplementary activities also. So the major way of identifying the enterprise was to identify the company which was engaged in manufacturing activity, whereas earlier we used to use the establishment which was the factory. So the annual survey of industries used to give us data about factory level, what's happening at the factory level, which used to be used. Now you're using company level data to ascertain the value added in manufacturing particularly. So now one implication of that is, of course, that you are now taking in manufacturing value added which may not be in manufacturing production proper, but in the supplementary activities of the company that you have designated as manufacturing. Now, if any of these missing companies were designated as manufacturing and their value added was incorporated in the data, then of course those earlier years estimates would be affected by this problem. The second was that the measurement of the private corporate sector itself and what its contribution was also made use of this MCA21 database. So therefore it is significant in terms of whether the data that you are getting or not getting from here is correct or not. Right. And how representative is it of what is actually happening in the economy.
And the other key question would be that, say suppose for instance this database is flawed, and what are the kind of implications it might have on policy making, especially considering that so much of our discourse around growth and development and planning itself is based on the GDP itself, and what would you see as the implications?
Well, one of the kind of implications of the changed method of measuring GDP has been that there has been a question mark about whether the GDP growth rate that is being measured by the new series, is that correct or not, or is it actually lower than what this is measuring. Now, more important than just precisely that question is this, that if you are using the GDP growth rate as a summary indicator of the health of the Indian economy, right, then this difference between what this is showing and what might actually be may mean that your policy approach is governed by complacency, that you think that things are going very well. Whereas the reality is that even if you look inside the GDP data, into the details of it, and you look at several other official data sources, there are significant signs of the Indian economy, even when you look at it in terms of just its growth and forget about the question of jobs or distribution of the income that is being generated, even then there are signs that it is not doing very well. So in the GDP series, you also get data about what is happening to investment in the economy. You find that for almost a decade, investment has been stagnating. Investment is the way in which productive capacities in the economy are increased. This is corroborated by other data that you have about the production of capital goods, about the imports of capital goods. If you are investing, then you are going to buy capital goods or you are going to import them. So the trends in the production of capital goods and import of capital goods corroborate the fact that investment has been stagnating. Important sectors like construction have been doing poorly. This is corroborated by cement production and consumption data, for example. You know that India's trade has also been stagnating for a pretty long time now. And you can see from, as far as manufacturing is concerned, from the index of industrial production data or even from the annual survey of industries data, you can see that the industrial growth performance, no matter what the GDP series is showing, the industrial output growth performance for almost 8 years now has been extremely poor, the worst that one has seen in 3 to 4 decades. So there are all these signs that the economy is not doing well, and all these, if you were to give to any economist, for example, these data piece, all this data, and suppose we didn't have GDP, aggregate GDP data, we had these things, and you ask them to make a reasonable estimate as to what was happening to Indian GDP, you wouldn't get the GDP growth figure that you are getting from this series. So by all reasonable estimates, there is sufficient evidence to indicate that the Indian economy is not doing very well. If despite that your GDP growth figures are showing pretty reasonable growth, and it is, by the way, only this one of the reasons why the question marks are there about the GDP growth figures, is that with this new GDP series, there is a divergence between India's GDP growth and what's happening in the rest of the world, which didn't exist earlier. Otherwise, it was going up and down more or less in sync with what's happening in the rest of the world economy. This new GDP series has meant that it has diverged, and that's what has made India the fastest growing economy amongst the major economies of the world. So if your GDP series growth is indicating to you things are fine, and all these other indicators are telling you that things are not really fine, and you focus on only the GDP growth rate, then obviously your policy approach is going to be characterized by complacency. You're not really interested in addressing the real problems of the economy.
Right. And this also brings into question the larger issue of the statistical apparatus in India itself. There have been a lot of controversy. NSE members resigned recently, and there have been accusations of data being fudged in various fields. So how do you see these recent developments in the light of all this?
Well, I think there are two broad issues about the credibility of India's statistical system. One is a credibility question that arises from the fact that there are questions about the quality of the estimates that you are generating, even independent of any manipulation. If the methods that you use are not appropriate, then the quality of the estimates that you generate of anything are not the best possible. There are always ways and means by which those with expertise in the field ascertain what's the best estimate that can be made given the information that is available. Because all of these are estimates, these are not actual figures. These are estimates of what's happening in the economy. So whether you are getting the best possible estimates or not is a question. And the second question is whether everything that can be known to the public, to those with expertise in the field, is being revealed or not, or is data being actually hidden. This has come up because of the labor force survey data not being released. So, whether data is being suppressed or not. There are also questions about, for example, in the union budget, whether everything is being properly revealed or not, or there is some bit of playing around with estimates there also. So, there are all these questions about the credibility of the data, even if you are not explicitly manipulating the data. But you can still say that reasonably it would be the conclusion that can be drawn is that political considerations perhaps are interfering in that process. You may not be willing to examine or scrutinize the methodological problems that you have in your estimates because it's not politically convenient to change the estimates. Political considerations may be deciding whether data is to be released or not. Well, if that starts happening, then it's a very small step from there to explicit manipulation of data. So, even if there is no actual manipulation of data that is happening in the sense of data being fudged, okay, there is a manipulation happening in terms of what is being released or what is not being released, what is being accepted as a method, what is not being accepted as a method. That is directly or indirectly subject to political manipulation.
And to come back to the issue we started with, so what do you see as an immediate step that can be taken to maybe, say, redress some of the concerns that have been raised about this database specifically?
Well, the best way to address these questions is to release as much of the data as possible, make public the procedures and methods by which different estimates have been done. So, MCA21 database is a database of companies. These are companies which submit returns, which a lot of that can be in any case accessed company by company. You can access, you can pay and get the details about because there are legal requirements for disclosure. So, a lot of the information that they are submitting is not secret. Okay. Some bit of information that cannot be necessarily revealed may still be brought out without revealing the company in relation to which the data is being told. So, if all that data is there in the public domain, people have access to that data, people have access to other data which has been held back, and you have a clearly laid down, you also revealed the precise methods by which these have been arrived at, then the experts in the field, they may not have one opinion, but they will debate, discuss, and in that process, at least the credibility of the process will be maintained. And out of that debate and discussion also, if there are problems in the way in which estimates are being made, whichever direction the problem may be, they can be corrected. What else? What other way is there? You cannot have anyone who has no expertise in that area deciding whether a particular data is telling you the truth or not. In any case, data is supposed to give you the facts. You can't say this is not the fact if you don't have the data which can tell you that this particular piece of data is giving you a wrong conclusion. So, if we are going to arrive at conclusions about the economy and what's happening on it on the basis of predetermined conclusions, then of course you don't need any data. But if you are to be serious about addressing issues of the economy based on a realistic understanding of what's actually happening, then this data is extremely important. There are of course other reasons why also that data is important. In the long run, if the credibility of your statistical system is under question, no one believes what your data is, then economic decisions by those in the rest of the world who are not which can affect the Indian economy will also be based on suspicion about what your data is actually showing. and that may not have very good consequences for the Indian economy in the future.
Thank you, Professor Mazumdar.
Thank you.
That's all we have time for today. Keep watching NewsClick.